There's hysteria in Beijing. 50 million barrels of Venezuelan oil, which have already been loaded onto tankers for China, by the way, are being redirected by Trump and quietly sent to Texas and Louisiana. Trump has forbidden the transitional, as he called it, temporary government of Rodriguez from negotiating with the enemies of the United States. He phrased it differently. In response, the Chinese leadership stayed silent.
Yes, China takes, I think, about 80% of Venezuela's crude oil exports. President Trump blocks Delcy Rodriguez's interim government from sending shipments to China. In addition, the Trump administration told Rodriguez, well, look, you have to break economic ties with China. So what was China's response? Well, it was rhetorical, but there was no pushback. And actually, it seems that China is all show, bluff, and empty threats, but it's not the superpower everyone thought it was last week.
That's Gordon Chang, author of numerous books and monographs about China, a freelance advisor to Trump and a Fox News analyst.
You know, regarding the seizure of these tankers, the Russians are actually threatening to sink American ships. The Chinese are staying silent, which actually shows that the Chinese know the limits of their capabilities, and they're simply not messing with President Trump.
Well, I mean, look, we knew that China would be unhappy about this. I mean, China supported Venezuela and cooperated with Maduro in many areas. But the additional problem of the President of the United States dominating the oil infrastructure there in Venezuela must be a real slap in the face for Beijing right now. What are they going to do about it? How do you think they'll respond?
They just won't respond in any meaningful way because they can't. I think China now realizes that it's in an extremely vulnerable position because it's losing not only Venezuela but also Iran. Because the new government there may not be as friendly to the Chinese as the current one. And China takes more than 90% of Iran's crude oil exports, so it will have to fight desperately for energy resources. Considering that energy is the cornerstone of societies. The United States, which has been the largest oil producer for 8 consecutive years, is also the largest producer of liquefied natural gas. The United States truly dominates, especially since we now control 303 billion barrels of Venezuela's proven reserves, plus Exxon's relations with neighboring Guyana and our excellent relations with the Gulf states. So right now, the United States is in a very enviable position when it comes to this critically important energy resource.
So Venezuela, 80% of their oil went to China and 90% of Iran's oil went to China. Well, that's about 2 million barrels a day, which is 15% of what China needs to produce its goods and serve its population. Of course, this amount can be found from other suppliers, but because of the sanctions, China was getting these 2 million at very good prices, somewhere around $6 to $10 per barrel cheaper. Well, what does an immediate increase in the price of their oil by $6 to $10 per barrel mean? So it's not catastrophic, it means a blow to China. Not catastrophic, but I would even say it's more of a political blow than an economic one. Plus, a worsening of their position in trade negotiations with the United States.
Yes.
This is a great example of how President Trump looked around and said, what we've been doing for the last 25 years hasn't worked. Venezuela kept going downhill, causing more and more problems in our country. They expelled 8 million desperate citizens from their country. Some are now great, hardworking Americans, but many are criminals, drug dealers, or in desperate situations. They hurt the global oil markets by crashing their own production, and instead of replacing oil revenues, they turned to drug trafficking and partnerships with Russia and Iran. This hasn't helped the Western Hemisphere or America, and we've just watched it happen.
This is the United States Secretary of Energy. As you noticed, he said that we basically don't like the Russian-Chinese partnership right under our noses. And how long are we going to control Venezuela? Here's what Trump-hating cable news network says about this. Subtitles.
They don't have any exact dates for how long they actually want to control Venezuela's oil exports. And this matches what we heard from administration officials when they laid out their plans during a meeting with lawmakers on Capitol Hill yesterday. Namely, that they plan to basically extract oil from Venezuela and try to control this whole operation indefinitely. That exact term was widely used, including by Energy Minister Chris Wright when he spoke in Miami yesterday. I think that's obvious. This raises a lot of questions, especially from lawmakers and Democrats who, unlike their Republican colleagues, basically claim that they are concerned we are getting drawn into a prolonged intervention here into the affairs of a foreign government which really has a questionable legal basis.
Bombing Libya on Obama's orders by Hillary was fine. Destroying Belgrade on Clinton's orders actually turned out to be beneficial. But without a single American killed and without battles on the fields of Venezuela, kicking out the cartels and enemies of the United States from there is illegal. Well, let's use a bit of common sense and figure out the situation ourselves. Nikit, a politician connected to drug trafficking, loses the election, seizes power by military force, kills, arrests, and deports the opposition and their families. Well, like let's say, for example, Lukashenko, if we take someone closer to Russia, Ukraine, that world. He also seizes the rest of the property from the enterprise owners, his boss and mentor. So Hugo Chavez took almost all of it, finished it off, so to speak. Took what was left, well, there's still a little bit left with Chevron, but he finished it off in the end. International courts are filed against him, and the courts rule that he must pay compensation for the damage caused because he caused it completely illegally. On one hand, there are drugs. On the other, a military rebellion and total disregard for elections. Well, in addition, so to speak, he also, as they say, stole from America. He brought this to court, meaning to the United Nations and everything else. And this nice person doesn't give it back, meaning he forces 7 million residents out of his own country, Venezuela, by creating conditions of hunger. Just like, well, once Stalin did even worse. Yes, he organized the Holodomor in Ukraine and Kazakhstan. And Venezuelans were luckier. I would say they had more places to run to. In the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, there was nowhere to run, and they weren't given any order or relief. Well, about 6 plus 2, probably 8 million people died of starvation there. When you cut down the forest, chips fly, as Vissarionovich used to say. So the chips are us. 8 million people. The Venetian genius, unlike the Soviet genius, then invited America's enemies to his country, everyone he could find, and allowed them to set up centers to fight against the West. So, by the way, apparently he was a Sephardic Jew, both his grandmothers were Jewish, and he became the best friend of people who wanted to destroy 6 million Jews in Israel, and just as many in Europe and the United States. That is, Venezuela was pumping oil that was developed by Americans. They had no money, no resources, no knowledge, no intelligence. They had nothing. The Americans arrived, began developing it, and paid them for their work. Their oil was being transferred by Venezuela. This oil was going to America's enemies. They were bringing drugs into the United States, largely delivered from China, and constantly loudly declaring how much they hated American imperialists. A center of hatred and resistance against the United States was organized right under God's nose. A stronghold of America's enemies, actively operating. So that we would suffer, they set up a certain center there, and their purpose was to make things bad for us. Other countries in the region, such as Cuba, were getting Venezuelan subsidies to oppose us. It's already very, very, very close to us, within the range of any missile delivered from Iran, China, or Russia. As a result of all these complex actions, the United States decided to restore Venezuela's legitimately elected government, resume oil production, and drive America's enemies out of the Caribbean basin. Well, I mean, to bring it back, so to speak. Yes, that's called not a revolution, but a counter-revolution. I really don't like revolutions. So, to drive out the usurper and the tyrant, to get rid of the drug cartels, to expel terrorist organizations, to remove America's enemies along with their missiles, Or maybe leave the missiles and just kick them out. So the editor says, you don't have the right to do that. And Trump says, why not? That's just stupid. It only benefits the criminals and hurts us. Why should we follow that? The nonsense you're telling us is just completely unclear. Why should we do that? So, what was once forbidden is now allowed. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Is it allowed or not? By the way, if you want to support the channel, we have a donation link below, and there's channel sponsorship in the description. Sponsorship is $4 a month. If you can give more, that's great, but 4 is the minimum. We would be grateful if you subscribe for a year. It actually comes out to just $3 a month. Also, for the next 3 days, my book Capitalism 101 in Russian will be free. There's also a link there. You can download it and you'll automatically be subscribed to free video seminars that I also host. We've already prepared over 100 of them, so you'll have plenty to do for the next 6 months to a year. Now let's get back to our Zia to Zia.
How long will the United States maintain control over the country of Venezuela? His answer was, only time will tell. That's what he said. Beyond the simple statement that the United States can control Venezuela by extracting oil from its reserves. Quote, for years. And also a new plot twist. In the past 24 hours, the United States has seized 2 oil tankers linked to Venezuela. One was loaded with about 2 million barrels of crude oil, and the other was an oil tanker that the United States had been pursuing for 2 weeks. Elena Trin from Cable News Network is live at the White House with more details. What have you learned? An interview, Elena? Yes, I think it was a very interesting interview, Kate. It lasted several hours.
As reported by the New York Times.
And look, some of it is just fairy tales.
The United States is moving a strike group to the borders of Iran. Israel is on Delta combat readiness, as I already reported, in Iraq, near the borders of Iran.
There's a whole situation with Delta Force operators in this region right now, Delta Force. The American Delta Force, which, as is known, captured Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, is now moving its troops to the Middle East, beyond the Iranian border. We also have more than a dozen American strategic transport planes that have crossed the Atlantic to Europe and the Middle East. But there are also many transport helicopters operated by America's Night Stalkers, the elite unit that apparently delivered the Delta commanders to Venezuela. The situation is escalating very quickly. We also have a special message from the United States government to the Iranian people. Delta Force has now been deployed to the Middle East, and Army Rangers and airborne assault forces from Europe are also being rapidly redeployed. Currently, United States and British tanker aircraft are heading to the region, subtitles by Dimatorzok.
Refueling tankers from England are heading to the region, but there is no word yet on any movement from the United States Fifth Fleet, which is responsible for security and oil shipments and everything else. In the Persian Gulf and surrounding areas, military bases are open to the strikers. There are weapons and food supplies there, and several core bases have been seized.
(2023). So, as I said, today started very early. And in fact, the internet in Iran is currently completely shut down, completely disconnected, so it's astonishing. Previously, the Iranian regime decided to slow down the internet extremely so that they still had access, the regime itself and those who needed to know what was happening. Now they have completely isolated the entire country, including their regime, from the world. And Iranian mobile users are now also completely cut off from the network. And those people who have access to Starlink, they'll be fine. According to the Crown Prince, there are still hundreds of thousands of Starlink devices in Iran that were smuggled in. But the situation is heating up as it gets closer to 8 p.m. local time. This is the key moment that the Crown Prince has announced in the last couple of days. But of course, we'll still try to get you all the latest news from inside the country, even if there's a slight delay.
As the Crown Prince reported, 200,000 of Musk's Starlink phones were, of course, secretly brought into the country, and the internet shutdown did not prevent the organizers of the riots and uprisings from coordinating their actions and getting the news. Family members of the Revolutionary Guards have applied for asylum in France. A large number of members, especially the top leadership, come from areas with significant Muslim communities in France. Iranians are actually outraged. Iranians are outraged that Europe is giving or is about to give them visas.
Okay, someone said the IRGC families should stay where they are. Europe doesn't need them and doesn't want them. They ruined their own country. Let them stay and fix it. No, they shouldn't, Mark. They shouldn't stay and fix it. They should stay, face trial, and go to prison. No, none of us need the IRGC to come and fix anything.
That's right. It's like us in the United States. We don't want our thieves to leave and live off the stolen money. We want them to go to court and, first of all, immediately return everything they've stolen. And then they should go to prison. There they should work to feed themselves instead of eating and watching television at our expense.
Some Iranian high-ranking officials, particularly from the reformist clan, are starting to switch sides, that is, to the reformist clan. This is President Masoud Pezeshkian, the president of the Islamic Republic, who sees how part of his inner circle is actually defecting, making contact with foreign agencies as well as with opposition movements. This mafia clan has long been involved in large-scale drug trafficking, especially with Colombian, Venezuelan and Mexican mafias, as well as arms trafficking, prostitution and art trafficking. But we see that for exactly 24 hours now, several prominent figures from the reformist camp have been applying for visas. In any case, they are trying to obtain French visas for their families in France through a Parisian lawyer. Well, I'm asking you. Indeed, for several years now, these reformers have had very good, very close relations with, how should I put it, the foreign ministries of France, essentially starting with France itself. France has been quite generous and hospitable since 1978. In October 1978, Ayatollah Khomeini, founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran, visited Nofle-le-Château.
And he returned to Iran on an Air France plane.
Of course, you understand.
France helped the Ayatollahs take Iran into the iron grip of Islamism. Why and for what reason? Remember, I once said that socialists and Islamists are kind of two sides of the same thing. Namely, total control over the souls and property, naturally, of the subjects. They have, strange as it may sound, very similar goals. And most importantly, both sides invoke some higher justice in the deprivation of freedom and property. They call it by different names. Some call it Allah, others call it conscience and honor. Something else like that, morality, completely substituting these names with their own religious chants. From those who actually produce this property, they take it away, and freedom from everyone. As we know, we received our freedom not from the state, but from the Lord God, and that's why when they take it away from us, we can't just ignore it. They believe in their God, they don't believe in their God, but in reality, they both believe and don't believe. So mullahs and socialists are the same counterfeit coin, they're just looking at it from different sides. Who will help Venezuela, Iraq, Cuba, Colombia, and all those other fascist socialists, communists, and slavists? Subtitles.
Russia can't come to their aid except by supplying weapons. We know that at least 5 Russian transport planes have entered Iran in recent days with unknown cargo. Syria, another ally of Iran, has already fallen, and Iran has no other allies in the region. It seems unlikely that China will quickly help Iran. Thus, we are witnessing a situation unfolding right before our eyes where Iran is more isolated than ever and militarily weaker than ever. After Operation Midnight Hammer demolished their nuclear program, Fordow and Natanz were struck by 30,000-pound bunker busters, while Isfahan was hit by many cruise missiles, disabling all 3 sites. Remember the cruise missiles, because we'll come back to that soon. So we're watching what could be happening. I'm not saying this is certain, but what could be developing toward a very, very likely outcome when the regime in Tehran, Khamenei and all his scumbag friends will get on a plane and be forced to fly to Russia,
Khamenei to France. He doesn't want to. He wants to go to the girls. He was told they're virgins. To Moscow, and he's right. In other parts of the world, Trump will get him.
That terrible 47-year tyranny, I don't want to say it, but things aren't going well for them. You probably know better than anyone how bad things are. And I made it clear to them that if they start killing people, which they usually do during their riots, they have a lot of riots. If they do that, we will hit them very hard. Dozens of people have already been killed. I know you don't set red lines, but have you told them what the limit of your patience is? Well, some have died because of, as you know, crowd control and other things. We're watching this very closely. The crowds are so large, there was a stampede, there were 3 stampedes, and people died in them. And I'm not sure I can necessarily hold anyone accountable for that. But they know, and they've been told very strictly, even more strictly than I'm telling you now, that if they do this, they'll have to pay for it.
So, President Trump once again confirms his intentions to bomb Iran in order to support the protesters.
At that point, it's enough to make a promise. And knowing that this person doesn't make empty threats already stops the bloodshed, the killing.
We have 2 options that we could consider here. Tomahawk missiles launched from submarines like the ones we used to strike Isfahan. So basically, this is a Tomahawk missile. This is what we could use to strike targets in Iran, and we can launch them from submarines that constantly patrol off the coast of Iran. What would we attack? We would attack military facilities, IRGC facilities, government facilities. You can hit them with cruise missiles if you want to, but that's not the only option on the table. Another option on the table is possibly a stealth bomber strike. We could use a stealth bomber. We could hit them hard wherever they are. Their air defense is no match for American stealth tech due to Operation Midnight Hammer. So we could deploy F-22s, F-35s, and B-2 bombers. Look at this beautiful aircraft. Beautiful, beautiful aircraft. We could go in and hit them too, which would be just huge if we do it. So these are 2 options following the Operation Midnight Hammer model.
But now, instead of striking the factories, we would hit the headquarters and leadership, that is, the Iranian clerics and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, to decapitate, so to speak, the resistance, to give the army an order. But who can give the army an order? Shah Crown Prince seize the military bases, command posts, communications, and basically all government buildings, after which everything will be over. Or give the go-ahead to Netanyahu and destroy all of Iran's air defenses, just in case. Cuba is either already, but...
Something monumental is happening. In the country of Cuba, something monumental is happening, and you can clearly see President Trump's fingerprints all over it. 90 miles off the coast of Florida, a communist relic of the Cold War is on the verge of complete collapse. And all of this is because President Trump just pulled off something so strategically brilliant that even the most experienced military experts are wondering how the heck he did it.
Gentlemen, as you can see, it's foolish to watch my videos only halfway through. I develop topics and show the connection between one thing and another. If something happened in the middle and you decided that everything is already clear, let me assure you that's not the case. There are such twists in Trump's actions and in world events. You should switch to the cartoon Masha and the Bear after finishing watching, not before you've finished. So, what is it? Where is it going? What I'm showing you is moving because sometimes it moves completely unexpectedly. Once again, what happened almost a week ago.
In 2 hours and 20 minutes, 150 American planes disabled the air defense systems of Venezuela, Russia, and China. They took out the dictator and drug trafficker who was guarded by Cuban troops, and they radically changed the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere without losing a single American life.
Well, it's now clear that was just the first move, E2 to E4 in Trump's ongoing international policy. We talked about how it would affect China, Russia, and the war in Ukraine. But Cuba has already felt the pain of the blow. They no longer have a source of oil, practically for free, and funding from their sociology brother in Caracas.
As it turns out, Venezuela operates very much like a captured queen, which is now being repositioned as a forward operating base for a rival country and is in its sights for the next takeover. Rook Cuba. Since 1999, Cuba has survived on Venezuelan oil. Hugo Chavez sent 100,000 barrels every day. Nicolas Maduro continued this cooperation. Over the years, Venezuela poured $60 billion into the Cuban economy. In return, Cuba sent doctors and military advisors and, most importantly, security forces that helped Maduro stay in power. 5. Basically, without this oil, Cuba simply wouldn't have any economy at all. Chavez, Hugo Chavez, Hugo Chavez, Hugo Chavez. Mexico, the second largest supplier to Cuba, has already reduced its deliveries from 22,000 barrels a day to 7,000 after Rubio's visit to Mexico City in September. So where is Cuba not turning away from? Well, Russia supplies about 5,500 barrels a day, but increasing that number would only jeopardize negotiations with the United States over Ukraine. Cuba has been in recession for the 6th year in a row, and inflation is out of control. An ordinary Cuban can't heat his home or feed his family. And now they're about to lose the only thing that literally keeps the lights on, and President Trump already sees what's happening.
Cuba seems ready to fall. I don't know if they'll be able to hold on, but Cuba now has no income. All their income came from Venezuela, from Venezuelan oil. They don't get any of that anymore, and Cuba is literally ready to fall. And there are many wonderful Cuban Americans who will be very happy about this.
Americans of Cuban descent will be happy, but Russia, China, and North Korea won't be happy at all. Russia regularly sends warships to the Caribbean region and Cuba. Since 1924, groups of several warships have visited Havana, including even a nuclear submarine. Once, against the backdrop of the current crisis, Russia is moving several warships toward Cuba. But this is nowhere near the kind of force that would want to challenge the United States Armada, which stands in the way of anyone trying to bring anything into Cuban waters.
Now, the last time Cuba lost a patriotic state with the Soviet Union was when Cuba lost its patron state after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. It took 4 years for it to hit rock bottom. This time, many analysts predict that Cuba will collapse within this year, not because we invaded there, but because we stopped supporting the dictator who, in turn, supported them. What's so important to understand here is that Trump doesn't view Cuba through an academic or diplomatic lens. As a real estate developer and influential broker, he sees location, leverage, and the symbolism of Cuba. It is located at the crossroads of sea routes, at the entrance to the Gulf, situated at the southern borders of America as a complex geopolitical issue. When Trump talks about Cuba and Venezuela, he is once again asserting America's dominance in the Western Hemisphere, reminding the world that this remains America's backyard.
But we are returning to the Monroe Doctrine, which Trump has modernized. We have our productive area there, and we don't want Chinese or Russian missiles there. We definitely don't want that. Yes, someone might say, but Putin attacked Ukraine for the same reason. They've already said it. So how are you any better than him, gentlemen? We had to leave Afghanistan. That's enough. We spent 20 years there. But does that mean the withdrawal was justified? But what does that mean? There were different ways to do it. It could have been done smartly, or it could have been done the Biden way. You could run away, leave billions worth of weapons there, and abandon those who helped us to their fate, just completely leave them behind. Yes, in the same way, I understand the reason, let's say, for Russia's discontent. Maybe it's not right, but maybe no one has managed to stop it so far. As they say, it attacked simply because it could. But the way it did it, it's terrible. The way it did it, it's terrible. Because a huge number of people died, children died, women died, cities were destroyed, kindergartens and hospitals were bombed. It's terrible. All of this, you can always do things differently. It's your choice how to do it. Now, the Arab resistance to Israel, well, I can understand it. I don't really justify it. I think it's unjustified, but I can understand it. We don't know the history, but we see something happening now, dislike it, and will resist. But to bomb residential buildings, kindergartens, and even to fire at Israel from your own school or hospital, knowing that a strike from Israel will come back to the place where that rocket was launched from, or something else. That is, to the school and the hospital where there are sick children. In Israel, we called that the Arab methodology. Not a single Israeli would ever put their own children or someone else's children in danger. By the way, a retaliatory strike from the enemy as well. It's unimaginable to even think of such a thing. They do this all the time, and it's considered great. They came up with it the right way. The Russians taught them. By the way, just so it's clear, yes, at the training courses near Moscow, they were taught how to hijack planes, and also this trick, putting children and women between them, sticking rifles through and shooting from there. So Russians, Islamists, really any collectivists, for the sake of achieving their goals, they will easily, absolutely destroy. Well, let's say, for example, even their own mother, definitely mothers. Well, you get it. An ordinary person has only one mother, and any number of their own children, parents, all their brothers and sisters. They have a different attitude towards life, simply a different attitude towards life. Jews love life, while Islamists love death. It's simply a different culture and way of thinking. I can't understand them, just like they can't understand us, right? And Russians are different, completely different. They're not like Islamists. They hate and fear everything foreign, anything different. They don't like anything that's not like them, but they pretend otherwise, of course, hiding that fear. It's clear, right, that they have their so-called sacred values, their special morals. They think they're even higher than the Nordic race of the Germans. Russians are terrible racists. Russians are really terrible racists. Absolutely. In reality, it all comes from a sense of inferiority. This is, so to speak, excuse me, a cheap kind of psychology. Yes, and that's the main trait and issue of Russians. Add to that a dark, heavy, almost Mongolian envy, and you get a lovely little set, a bouquet that fills the Great Rus, or as they call it, Russia. Not Rus. Rus was Kiev, from Moscow, Muscovy, as Ukrainians say, Muscovy from Moscow to the very edge, yes. But, by the way, Ukrainians are different, yes, like cousins, very close, but they don't have that Mongol thing. He is beautiful, yes, but yes, barely, yes, Slava Azayonean. With you now, it's silly. No, do it, try. What are you passing on to such an institute? Well, yes, society. Well, go ahead and forget. Nothing bad. Yes, well.
To be continued, the Monroe Doctrine continues. As for Trump, Cuba is a relic of the Cold War era, a remnant of a world that no longer exists, and as such, Cuba represents frankly unfinished business. If the world has officially moved from the Cold War era to a new civilizational era where rising civilizational states like Russia, China, India, and the United States govern their regional hegemons, then there is absolutely no justification for a relic of the Soviet era to continue to exist.
To be honest, we're really tired of Cuba. There's a Russian word for that. We've been sick of it for a long time, but it's not an enemy anymore. It's not even a thorn or a speck in the eye. It's just a stinking cesspit where some of our citizens' relatives live. That's all, just continuing. And of course, honestly, it should just be buried, leveled to the ground like Gaza, and a resort area should be built there, the coolest one on the planet. Just like it was there once. Well, the commies are getting in the way, and sometimes they even shout something unclear, like, down with imperialism, but quietly so no one hears them, and they're just bursting with envy. Really bursting with envy. There's nothing you can do about it. The island's population dreams of Florida, and every other person would like to personally deal with all the members. They'll get to the Amparthia cube. Why are we building a tall fence? It means there are no Cubans around the perimeter of our world, so we want to build it a little farther away. That's why we need to clear out everything up to the fence. We need to get rid of the thistles. Yes, our garden should be free of thistles. By the way, this is exactly what we're doing, but why are we doing it? That's the most interesting part. And so we've reached the fortress called America. If after World War II and the decline of European civilizations the world was bipolar, and if for a while, as a result of winning the Cold War, the world tried to live, so to speak, under one boss, then that's the Trump era. It marked the transition to dividing the world into spheres, and how the others will create their own spheres is not the business of the United States at all. But we, the United States of America, will still take part in this, at least at first. But as for our own backyard, we'll put up such a fence around it and make our army so strong that no one will even think about getting into our American world. So, I repeat, Greenland, Canada, Alaska, continental America, up to and including the Panama Canal, the Caribbean Basin, and basically everything within 2,000 miles of the borders of the United States of America. This is our, so to speak, patch of land, and we want to play on this patch ourselves. We don't own all of this, we're not going to, and we won't even try. But we call the shots here, and no one else is going to bring their business onto this territory. No one from the outside will dare, or they'll regret it. Here we build prosperity. Here we create a world of freedom, a free market, and true capitalism. If you want, it will be free, beneficial, and safe here, and everyone who strives for something will be able to achieve it. And what's outside? Okay, outside China is spreading its wings. Russia too, is spreading its wings. India is spreading its wings. Pakistan is spreading its wings outside. Turkey wants to lead the Muslim world somewhere, while Saudi Arabia wants to lead it in a completely different direction. And then there's Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, and others. Who else is there, so to speak? And other Malaysias, or who knows, maybe the Laotians will resist China. So another round of global reshuffling is starting to happen again. We just don't want to take part in it. Things are boiling over in their part of the world because they haven't matured enough for the free world yet. They haven't matured for freedom. Although they may have lived civilly for much longer, that's just how it happened. How should I say it about Levi Matvey, or Levitt Matvey, whatever he was called in The Master and Margarita. They called him Levi Matvey, Levi, or Levitt Matvey. Yes, he's not talking about the master. He says he doesn't deserve light, he deserves peace. That's what Yeshua asked to be passed on to Satan Beelzebub. So, Europeans, Asians, Africa, and most of the Middle East did not deserve peace. They did not deserve society. The Golden Rule, or as Trump calls it, the Golden Age of America. The subtitles still have to grow up and wander for 40 years in the desert. Yes, gentlemen, there's nothing to be done. They'll have to wander in the desert for 40 years subtitles. For Israel and the lesser Arab brothers, Trump created a model called the Abraham Accords. And by uniting and forgetting their grievances, they too can build their part of the world, protected from the battles of future conflicts in Asia, Europe, and Africa. You see, Sunnis, Persians, and Jews can create their own formation, the children of Abraham, and provide their people with a future different from 6,000 years of continuous wars, destruction, and killings. Today, unlike even 200 years ago, an offended chief may not just wipe out 200 members of another tribe by sending his warriors to their village. He can wipe out 200 million residents of a neighboring country by pressing a button between 2 cups of coffee, and he won't even have to make much of an effort. At the same time, I can't predict what will come out of this new model, but a new model of the world is being built. There's nothing you can do, maybe nothing at all, but just keep doing the same things as before and expect that when someone presses that very button, it reminds me of playing Russian roulette. Will this gun shoot me in the temple? And when will it happen? Will this gun shoot me in the temple? Trump is actually the first one I can remember who moved from building a theoretical model to putting it into practice. And I'm incredibly curious to live and see what comes out of it. Well, if not then, gentlemen, if I don't live to see it, please, you live to see it and then tell me about it. Goodbye.